In the summer of 2015, a 7-year-old boy vanished from the middle of a crowded amusement park in broad daylight, disappearing somewhere between a churro cart and a costumed parade route in the space of less than 4 minutes. Police searched every ride, every restroom, every parked car in a lot holding thousands of vehicles. Nothing. No witnesses who agreed on what they saw. No security footage that showed the moment itself. The case went cold within 18 months, another unsolved file in a drawer nobody wanted to open. 8 years later, a teenage boy sitting alone in a school computer lab clicked on a cold case forum post out of idle curiosity and stared at an age progression photograph of himself. What investigators uncovered next shocked everyone. Before we continue, if you enjoy mysteries, cold cases, and shocking investigations, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another mystery. Now, let's get into today's story. Malik Reynolds Jung was, by every account anyone would later give, a boy who filled a room the moment he walked into it. He had his mother's wide, easy smile and his father's habit of narrating his own thoughts out loud, a running commentary that made car rides with him feel less like transportation and more like a live broadcast. He was 7 years old the summer he disappeared, small for his age, missing his left front tooth, obsessed with a cartoon about a dinosaur detective that he insisted on watching every morning before school, and fiercely, almost comically loyal to a stuffed rabbit named Captain Carrots that had been with him since infancy, and that, investigators would later note with a particular ache, was found untouched. In the back seat of his mother's car in the amusement park parking lot, exactly where he had left it that morning. His mother, Dana Reynolds, had grown up on the south side of Chicago, the daughter of a postal worker and a school librarian, and had moved to Seoul 11 years earlier for what was supposed to be a 2-year teaching contract at an international elementary school, the kind of adventure she told friends she wanted to have once, before life got too heavy to allow it. She met young Tae-woo during her second year in the city at a language exchange meetup in a coffee shop in Hongdae, and what began as an awkward exchange of English idioms and Korean grammar corrections turned, over the following year, into something neither of them had planned on and both of them, for a while, were grateful for anyway. They married 2 years later in a small ceremony that Tae-woo's mother, Young Hae-suk, matriarch of the Young Textile Group, and a woman known in Seoul business circles for a composure so total it unsettled people who mistook it for warmth, attended but did not smile through, not once, not in a single photograph from that day. Dana and Tae-woo divorced when Malik was 5. A quiet, largely amicable split driven less by any single betrayal than by the slow erosion of two people who had built a marriage around compromise until there was nothing left to compromise on. They shared custody without much conflict in the 2 years that followed, alternating weekends, splitting holidays, meeting for coordinated dinners on Malik's birthday that both of them privately found easier than either had expected. Dana kept teaching. Tae-woo kept working, uneasily, inside his family's company, a role he had never wanted but had never found the courage to fully refuse either. Caught for most of his adult life between his mother's expectations and his own quieter ambitions. Malik, for his part, seemed to move between his two households, the way children of amicable divorces sometimes do, adjusting without complaint, carrying Captain Carrots between two homes as the one constant that made both places feel like his. Young Hae-suk had never approved of the marriage, a fact she had never bothered to disguise, not at the wedding, not in the years that followed, not even, according to household staff who would later be interviewed, in front of Malik himself, whom she nonetheless doted on with an intensity that struck several people close to the family as strange, a woman who seemed to love her grandson without loving anything about the life he was actually living, the American mother, the divided household, the surname that carried Dana's family name alongside the Young name on every official document. She had, more than once, according to a household driver who eventually spoke to police, referred to Malik privately as a Young being raised like a stranger, a phrase the driver said had unsettled him enough at the time that he remembered it clearly years later, though he had never thought, at the time, that it meant anything beyond an old woman's stubborn disapproval. Dana's own mother, back in Chicago, had been skeptical of the move to Seoul from the beginning, worried in the particular way mothers worry about daughters who choose distance over proximity, though she had come around slowly over the years, visiting twice, learning to make a passable version of doenjang jjigae from a recipe Dana mailed her, keeping a framed photograph of Malik on her refrigerator that she updated every time a new one arrived. Dana's younger brother, Marcus, a Chicago firefighter, had FaceTimed with his nephew every Sunday for as long as Malik could hold a phone steady, teaching him, over the years and across 9 time zones, an ever-growing list of terrible knock-knock jokes that Malik recited with total, gleeful confidence to anyone who would listen, whether or not the joke actually made sense. At school, Malik was the kind of first-grader teachers remembered fondly years later without needing to consult a roster. A boy who organized impromptu playground detective games based on his favorite cartoon, appointing his classmates as suspects and witnesses with an earnestness that made even the most reluctant kids want to play along. His teacher, a patient woman named Miss Choi who had taught at the international school for over a decade, would later tell Detective Yang, through tears, that Malik had spent the final week of school before summer break planning an elaborate surprise for his mother's birthday, a hand-drawn card he had been hiding inside his cubby, one that Dana would not find until nearly 3 weeks after he disappeared, tucked behind a stack of workbooks she had been too afraid to sort through until then. His best friend at school, a boy named Ethan Park, had been the last classmate to see him before summer vacation began, and Ethan's mother later told police that the 2 boys had spent their final day of school trading a set of dinosaur trading cards, Malik insisting he would bring the full set to show Ethan the very next time they saw each other, a promise that never had the chance to be kept, and that Ethan, according to his mother, still occasionally mentioned years later, unprompted, in the specific, unguarded way children sometimes carry grief they don't yet have language for. Malak's dream, 7-year-olds not being known for modest ambitions, changed roughly every month, though that final spring he had settled, with unusual persistence, on wanting to become a detective who also drives a roller coaster. A career combination he explained to anyone who would listen with total seriousness, drawing elaborate diagrams of his imagined future workplace in the margins of his school notebooks, diagrams Miss Choi kept, unable to throw them away, in a folder in her desk drawer for years afterward. He had also, that spring, developed a habit of narrating small mysteries of his own invention during car rides, insisting that the family dog 2 doors down had a secret second family, or that the corner bakery's owner was hiding a treasure map inside a particular loaf of bread, elaborate fictions that made even the most mundane errand feel, for the length of the drive, like an adventure only he could see. Taewoo, for his part, had once dreamed of becoming an architect, a passion he had pursued with real seriousness through 2 years of university before his own father's declining health pulled him back into the family business, a sacrifice he rarely discussed, but that Dana had always understood in the years of their marriage as the quiet, unresolved ache underneath his more visible frustrations with the company. He had hoped, he told Dana once early in their relationship, that Malik might grow up with more freedom to choose his own path than he himself had ever been given, an irony that would sit particularly heavily on him in the years after the truth came out, a father who had spent his own adulthood resenting the ways his family's name had narrowed his choices, unable to protect his son from a far more devastating version of the same thing. On the second Saturday of that June, Dana, Taewoo, and Malik spent the day together at Sky Garden, a sprawling amusement park an hour outside Seoul, known for its towering wooden roller coaster, its seasonal flower festivals, and a summer parade route lined with costumed mascots that drew crowds thick enough to slow foot traffic to a crawl by early afternoon. It was meant to be an easy, ordinary day, the kind of outing divorced parents learn to manage with practiced coordination, Dana buying tickets online the week before, Taewoo picking Malik and Captain Carrots up that morning, all 3 of them meeting at the park gates just after 10 with sunscreen, a backpack of snacks, and a laminated park map Malik had already circled 3 rides on before they even reached the ticket counter. The day unfolded, by every account given afterward, with nothing unusual about it at all, which is precisely what made the 4 minutes that followed so difficult for anyone to later reconstruct. Malik rode the teacup ride twice, insisted on a churro from a cart near the Central Plaza, and spent nearly 20 minutes at a photo booth staffed by a costumed mascot shaped like a grinning sun. An Interaction Park staff would later confirm through ticket stub timestamps but never through footage, because the camera covering that specific booth had, according to the park's own maintenance logs, been flagged as malfunctioning 3 days earlier and was still awaiting repair. By early afternoon, the park's daily parade began working its way down the main promenade. A slow-moving procession of floats and dancers and mascots that drew nearly every visitor toward the same stretch of pathway at the same time, creating, for roughly 20 minutes, the densest and most disorganized crowd conditions the park experienced on any given day. Dana and Taewoo positioned themselves near a bench close to the parade route, Malik between them, and it was during this stretch, sometime between 1:20 and 1:24 in the afternoon, based on the time-stamped photo Dana took of Malik watching the parade and the time-stamped call Taewoo received from his office that pulled his attention away for what he would later swear, through tears, in an interrogation room, was no more than 90 seconds, that Malik disappeared. Dana turned back from adjusting her camera to find the space beside her empty. She assumed, for the first 30 seconds, that he had simply moved closer to the parade route, the way children do, drawn forward by a marching band or a favorite mascot. She called his name. She scanned the crowd at Malik's exact eye level, the way a mother instinctively does, looking for the top of a small head rather than an adult face. Nothing. She called Taewoo's attention away from his phone call, and within 2 minutes, both parents were pushing through a wall of strangers, calling a name that no small voice answered back. The afternoon Malik disappeared had been unusually bright even for June, the kind of high, cloudless heat that made the park's asphalt paths shimmer faintly by early afternoon, the air thick with the smell of fried dough and sunscreen, and, underneath it, the faint metallic tang of the roller coaster's brake system cooling between runs. The parade itself arrived with a wall of sound, brass instruments, and recorded pop music blaring from speakers mounted along the promenade, drowning out individual voices in a way that made calling a child's name feel, within seconds, almost pointless against the noise. Dana would later describe, in testimony she gave years afterward, the specific quality of panic that set in once she realized Malik was gone. Not a single moment of fear, but a physical sensation that seemed to drop through her chest and settle somewhere in her legs, making it difficult, for the first agonizing 30 seconds, to do anything but stand completely still in a moving crowd, searching a sea of unfamiliar faces for one small, familiar one that was no longer there. By nightfall, the temperature had dropped, and a light rain had begun to fall over the park's parking structure, a detail search volunteers would remember years later as one of the small cruelties of that first night, standing in ponchos under floodlights, calling a name into wet, echoing concrete while Dana sat wrapped in a blanket someone had handed her, refusing every suggestion that she go home, and rest, unable to imagine leaving the building where her son had last been seen. Park security was notified within 8 minutes, an unusually fast response time that investigators would later credit to Dana's insistence, refusing to accept the initial suggestion that Malik had likely wandered off and would turn up near a bathroom or a snack stand within the hour. The park was placed on a modified lockdown within 20 minutes, its exits monitored, though investigators would later determine, to Dana and Taewoo's lasting horror, that a park of that size, with over a dozen public exits and a parking structure serving thousands of vehicles, could not realistically be sealed quickly enough to guarantee anything, especially not during a peak crowd hour built specifically around drawing every visitor's attention toward a single spectacle at a single moment. Several parade attendees came forward in the initial hours to describe fragments of the crowd they remembered from that stretch of promenade. A mother from a neighboring city recalling a small boy in a red cap laughing near the float carrying the park's costumed characters, a detail that matched Malik's clothing exactly and that briefly gave investigators hope of narrowing his last known position to. Within a few meters, though the woman could not recall, no matter how many times she was gently re-interviewed over the following weeks, whether the boy had been walking with an adult or simply standing alone in the crush of the crowd, watching the parade the way any 7-year-old naturally would. A teenage employee stationed near the parade barricades reported briefly locking eyes with a small boy who appeared, for a moment, to be searching the crowd for someone, a memory she found herself replaying for years afterward. Uncertain, even now, she has said in interviews since the case broke open, whether what she remembers is a genuine recollection or a detail she has unconsciously reconstructed, from having read and reread the case file so many times across the following decade. But investigators would soon discover that the malfunctioning camera near the mascot photo booth wasn't even the strangest part. Local police arrived within 40 minutes and immediately opened a full missing child investigation, a designation that triggered search teams, a public alert broadcast across regional media, and a canvass of every employee working the park that day. Search dogs were brought in by early evening, working the promenade, the ride queues, the food court, and eventually the parking structure, where a trained scent dog handler reported that Malik's trail appeared to end abruptly near a service entrance close to the park's eastern loading dock, a gated area used by delivery vehicles and staff, access to which required a key card issued only to park employees and approved vendors. The gate's own security log showed no unusual activity that afternoon, no key card swipes outside of routine deliveries, a detail that struck the lead detective on the case, a careful, exacting woman named Detective Yang Sumin, as either genuinely reassuring or deeply suspicious, depending entirely on whether someone with legitimate access to that gate had chosen, for reasons she could not yet imagine, not to use their card at all. Detective Yang interviewed every employee scheduled to work near the parade route that day, a list that ran to nearly 90 names once vendors, costumed performers, and contracted security staff were included. Most accounts were unremarkable. A cotton candy vendor recalled seeing a small boy matching Malik's description near the service gate sometime after 1:30, but could not say with confidence whether he was alone, accompanied by an adult, or simply passing through with the general flow of the crowd. His memory, he admitted honestly, blurred by the sheer volume of children who passed his cart every hour of a summer weekend. A costumed performer playing the park's grinning sun mascot, a young man named Choi Jae-min, who had spent nearly 20 minutes with Malik at the photo booth earlier that day, was questioned extensively and initially struck Detective Yang as nervous in a way she found difficult to read, though his nervousness, once fully explored, appeared to stem from an unrelated and entirely mundane fear of losing. His job over the malfunctioning camera he had reported broken 3 days earlier and that management had not yet repaired. A bureaucratic failure, he worried, correctly as it turned out, would look suspicious in hindsight regardless of his actual involvement. Detective Yang herself later admitted, in an interview given years after the case finally closed, that she had spent an unusual amount of time in those early weeks focused on the malfunctioning camera itself, requesting maintenance records, repair tickets, and the names of every technician who had accessed the booth's electrical housing in the month before Malik's disappearance, convinced that a piece of broken equipment covering the exact location a search dog would later trace as a probable transfer point could not, reasonably, be entirely coincidental. The maintenance company's records, once fully reviewed, showed nothing more sinister than an understaffed vendor slow to respond to a low-priority work order, a mundane bureaucratic failure rather than a deliberate act of sabotage, though Detective Yang has said she never fully let go of her early suspicion that someone inside the park itself might have quietly ensured that particular repair request sat unresolved for exactly as long as it needed to, a theory she was never able to prove, and that investigators ultimately set aside once the true mechanism of the disappearance came to light years later and required no broken camera at all, only a familiar face a trusting child had no reason to fear. A groundskeeper named Han Kyung-ho, working near the service gate that afternoon, gave a statement that would haunt the investigation for years without ever fully resolving. He told police he recalled a woman, not a man, walking briskly with a young boy near the loading dock sometime after 1:30, a detail he mentioned almost in passing during his first interview, and then, strangely, recanted 2 days later, telling a different officer he must have been mistaken, that he had likely confused the memory with an entirely different afternoon. Detective Yang flagged the retraction as unusual enough to warrant a third interview, during which Han Kyung-ho grew visibly agitated, repeating that he simply did not remember clearly enough to be useful, a shift in his account that Detective Yang noted in her file with a single underlined word: coached. Vehicle tracking around the park's perimeter roads produced its own frustrations. Toll booth cameras along the highway leading back towards Seoul captured thousands of vehicles in the hours following Malik's disappearance, and Detective Yang's team spent weeks cross-referencing license plates against known offenders and any vehicle that appeared, however tenuously, out of place, a process that consumed enormous resources and ultimately identified nothing more than a handful of ordinary families driving home from an ordinary day at the park. Facial recognition software, still relatively new to Korean law enforcement at the time, was run against every clear frame investigators could extract from the park's functioning cameras, producing several false positives that each required days of manual verification before being ruled out, including one heartbreaking near miss in which a boy exiting the park with his own father was flagged, investigated, and cleared within 48 hours, a family that Detective Yang later said had been remarkably gracious about the intrusion into their ordinary Saturday. Facial recognition software, still relatively new to Korean law enforcement at the time, was run against every clear frame investigators could extract from the park's functioning cameras, producing several false positives that each required days of manual verification before being ruled out, including one heartbreaking near miss in which a boy exiting the park with his own father was flagged, investigated, and cleared within 48 hours, a family that Detective Yang later said had been remarkably gracious about the intrusion into their ordinary Saturday. A retired police officer named Oh Byung-chul, who had briefly served as a private security consultant for the Young family's estate nearly a decade earlier, before an unrelated dispute over unpaid contract fees ended the arrangement badly, resurfaced during the investigation's second year after an anonymous tip suggested he still held a grudge against the family significant enough to warrant a closer look. Detective Yang interviewed him twice, and while his bitterness toward the Young family proved genuine and considerable, his alibi for the day of the disappearance, corroborated by a hospital record showing he had undergone a minor surgical procedure that same week and was still recovering at home, closed that avenue definitively, one more name added to the long list of people investigators had needed to rule out before the truth could finally be found among those closest to the family rather than those estranged from it. Hospital records across the province were checked in the disappearance's first week, a routine step to rule out the possibility that Malik had simply been injured and separated from his parents by an ambulance run, a possibility Dana clung to, she has admitted, longer than the evidence reasonably supported, unable to fully abandon the version of events where her son was simply lost rather than taken. Property ownership records tied to the Young family's various holdings across the province were pulled as a matter of standard procedure once investigators began, cautiously and without any concrete justification at the time, considering whether family tension might play any role at all, though the records, reviewed against a family with dozens of properties spanning 3 provinces, produced nothing actionable in those early months. The rural Gangwon relative's stationery shop, simply one modest, unremarkable entry among many, never once flagged as worth a closer look. Dana and Taewoo, meanwhile, endured the particular cruelty of an investigation that could not yet tell them anything certain. Dana slept, when she slept at all, on the floor of Malik's bedroom in her apartment, Captain Carrots' twin, a second stuffed rabbit Malik had insisted on owning in case one gets lost, clutched against her chest. Taewoo, for his part, retreated into a silence his own family would later describe as uncharacteristic, spending long hours at his family's estate rather than his own apartment, a decision investigators initially read as a grieving father seeking comfort from his mother, though it would take years and considerably more digging for anyone to understand what that silence had actually been protecting. News crews camped outside both the park and the Young family's estate for the better part of 2 weeks, and Dana found herself, in the earliest and most disoriented days of the search, giving press conferences she barely remembers afterward, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her own sister, who had flown in from Chicago within 36 hours and stayed for the following 4 months, sleeping on Dana's couch, answering the phone so Dana wouldn't have to, fielding a flood of tips that arrived faster than any small department could reasonably process. News crews camped outside both the park and the young family's estate for the better part of 2 weeks, and Dana found herself, in the earliest and most disoriented days of the search, giving press conferences she barely remembers afterward, her voice steady in a way that surprised even her own sister, who had flown in from Chicago within 36 hours and stayed for the following 4 months, sleeping on Dana's couch, answering the phone so Dana wouldn't have to, fielding a flood of tips that arrived faster than any small department could reasonably process. At one televised briefing 4 days into the search, Dana stood beside Detective Yang and addressed whoever might be watching directly, her voice cracking only once on the final sentence. "If you have him, if you know where he is, please just leave him somewhere safe where someone will find him. He has a rabbit named Captain Carrots. He's missing his front tooth. He is 7 years old, and he is loved beyond anything I know how to put into words. Please." The clip aired repeatedly across national news for days afterward, and Detective Yang has said it was, without question, the moment the case captured a level of public attention that far outpaced most missing child cases the department had handled before or since, attention that brought in thousands of tips and, in the end, not one that pointed anywhere close to the truth. A regional Amber Alert-style bulletin ran continuously for the first 72 hours. Malik's photograph, a gap-toothed grin under a red baseball cap, appearing on highway signs and television broadcasts across 3 provinces. And for those first 3 days, the entire country seemed to be looking for one small boy, a wave of attention that brought hundreds of tips and, ultimately, not a single, one that led anywhere real. Detective Yang also spent considerable time in those first weeks examining the people closest to the family, following the standard, painful protocol of any child disappearance investigation, however unlikely it initially seemed to anyone who knew them. Dana's sister, still adjusting to jet lag when the disappearance occurred, was cleared within days through flight records and hotel check-in timestamps that placed her nowhere near the park. A former boyfriend of Dana's from her early years in Seoul, a man she had dated briefly before meeting Tae-woo and had not spoken to in over 5 years, was tracked down and questioned largely as a formality, his current life in Busan, a wife, 2 young children of his own, and an employer who confirmed he had been at work the entire day in question, closing that avenue within a single afternoon. Tae-woo's own younger sister, young Soo-yeon, who had always maintained a warmer relationship with Dana than her mother ever had, was interviewed extensively about the family's internal dynamics and gave investigators their first real glimpse of the tension simmering beneath the young household's composed public surface, describing, cautiously and with visible discomfort at speaking ill of her own mother. A household where Hae-suk's disapproval of the marriage had never fully faded, where holiday gatherings sometimes grew strained over comments about Malik's upbringing that Soo-yeon herself had found uncomfortable to witness, though she insisted, in that first interview, that she could never have imagined her mother capable of anything beyond old-fashioned disapproval. Investigators noted her account carefully, but found nothing at the time to connect it directly to the disappearance itself, filing it away alongside dozens of other details that would only make sense years later, once an entirely different set of facts came to light. A former nanny who had cared for Malik briefly during his toddler years, a young woman named Yoo Ji-yoon who had left the family's employment on good terms nearly 4 years before the disappearance, was located and questioned after an anonymous tip suggested she still maintained contact with young Hae-suk independent of the family. Yoo confirmed she had, in fact, continued occasional part-time work for the young household after leaving Malik's care, helping manage errands and correspondence for Hae-suk personally, a detail that struck Detective Yang as worth noting, though not, at the time, worth pursuing further, given that Yoo's own alibi for the day of the disappearance, a documented shift at a separate part-time job across the city, checked out completely. It was a detail Detective Yang would return to, with considerable frustration at her own younger self, nearly 8 years later. If you're enjoying this investigation so far, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It really helps the channel continue bringing you stories like this. Now let's continue, because what investigators uncovered next was even more disturbing. The first 6 months of the investigation produced a wave of tips that led nowhere. A pattern painfully familiar to anyone who has followed a missing child case unfold in real time. A convenience store clerk near the park reported a boy matching Malik's description buying candy alone the evening he disappeared. a lead that consumed nearly 2 full weeks of investigative resources before store security footage, once finally recovered from a backup server, revealed the boy in question was a full 2 years older than Malik and entirely unrelated to the case. An anonymous tip line call claimed Malik had been seen crossing into a neighboring province with a man in a delivery van. A lead detectives chased for over a month using highway toll records and gas station footage before concluding the caller had almost certainly fabricated the entire account, a disturbingly common occurrence in high-profile missing child cases that Detective Yang had encountered before but never stopped finding demoralizing. Dana, unable to simply wait for updates that rarely came, began building her own parallel effort, printing missing posters that she and a rotating circle of fellow international school parents distributed across every subway station and bus terminal within a 2-hour radius of the park. She created a public foundation within the first year, named simply for Malik, that would go on to fund age progression technology for other unsolved missing children cases across the country. A decision, she has said, in interviews since, came less from strategy and more from an inability to sit still inside her own grief without doing something that might, eventually, matter to someone else's family, even if it never brought her son home. Tae-woo attended the foundation's early fundraisers dutifully but distantly. And it was during this period, roughly 14 months after the disappearance, that Dana first noticed something she could not immediately name, a growing coldness between Tae-woo and his own mother that seemed to deepen rather than heal as the investigation dragged on, the opposite of what she would have expected from a grieving family drawing closer together in shared loss. Detective Yang's own commanding officer at the time, a veteran captain named Jo Hyun-tae nearing retirement, would later admit publicly that he had quietly authorized Yang to keep working the file on her own time long after the case's official priority had lapsed, an arrangement neither of them documented formally, but that both understood, without needing to say so, was the only way a case like Malik's ever stood a chance of staying alive inside an overworked department with hundreds of open files competing for the same limited resources. Captain Joe, in the same interview, said he had learned early in his career that some cases simply required someone stubborn enough to keep a drawer open past the point anyone else believed made sense, and that Yang, more than any other detective he had worked with in 3 decades, possessed exactly that particular, unglamorous kind of stubbornness. Every June, on the anniversary of the disappearance, Yang made a habit of pulling the file and reading through it in full, cover to cover, a private ritual she never fully explained even to her own family, searching each time for some detail she might have missed the year before, some inconsistency that would finally click into place the way Han Kyung-ho's retracted statement eventually did, years later than she would have liked. Her husband, she has said with a small, tired laugh in interviews since learned early in their marriage never to schedule anything on that particular weekend, understanding without needing an explanation that his wife would spend it, as she always did, alone at the kitchen table with a file 8 years past its official close date, refusing to let it go cold simply because a calendar said it was supposed to be over. The foundation's earliest volunteers were mostly other parents from Malik's school, mothers and fathers who had watched their own children play alongside him on the same playground equipment, and their involvement gave the effort a particular, sustaining kind of momentum in those first raw months. Phone trees organized to canvass new neighborhoods each weekend, a rotating schedule that ensured Dana was never entirely alone at any of the countless community meetings, press briefings, and quiet, fruitless searches that filled her calendar for years. Miss Choi, Malik's former teacher, volunteered every summer to help update the foundation's age progression materials, unable, she told a local reporter on the 3rd anniversary of the disappearance, to imagine doing anything less for a student she still thought about daily. Ethan Park's mother organized an annual walk each June along the route between the family's old apartment and Malik's school, an event that grew, modestly but steadily, from a dozen attendees the first year to well over 200 by the case's 6th anniversary, neighbors and strangers alike walking in near silence behind a banner bearing a photograph of a gap-toothed 7-year-old boy in a red baseball cap. The magnolia tree outside Dana's own childhood home in Chicago, oceans away from where her son actually was, became an unlikely fixture in her grief during those years, her mother sending photographs every spring when it bloomed, a small ritual neither of them ever explained to the other, but that both understood, the tree blooming faithfully every year, regardless of what was or wasn't happening on the other side of the world. Dana kept Malik's room in her Seoul apartment exactly as he had left it for the first 3 years, unable to pack away a single toy, before finally, on the advice of a grief counselor she had resisted seeing for far too long, allowing herself to box up some of his clothes, keeping only a handful of items, a favorite shirt, a drawing taped above his bed, the second stuffed rabbit, arranged carefully. On a single shelf rather than scattered across a room that had begun, she admitted to her counselor to feel less like a shrine and more like a wound she couldn't stop reopening every time she walked past the door. She continued teaching throughout those years, a decision several friends gently questioned, but that Dana has said, in retrospect, kept her tethered to something resembling ordinary life, a classroom full of other people's children who needed her fully present even on days when presence felt like the hardest thing in the world to offer. Her students, over the years, came to know a quiet, unspoken version of her story, some parents choosing to explain it gently, others simply noting that their children's teacher seemed to carry a particular kind of gentleness reserved for kids who were struggling, a gentleness more than one parent would later describe, once the reunion made international news, as having always made a strange kind of sense in hindsight. A year passed, then 2, then 3. Detective Yang was eventually reassigned to other cases, though she kept Malik's file on her desk long after department policy would have allowed her to close it, a quiet, unofficial refusal to let the case fully go cold that she never fully explained to her supervisors. Dana submitted Malik's DNA profile to a national missing persons database in the case's second year, a routine step she completed without much hope, understanding by then how rarely such databases produced results without a matching profile to compare it against, a matching profile that, for years, simply did not exist anywhere in the system. The case, meanwhile, took on a life of its own within a growing community of online true crime enthusiasts who had, over the years, built an extensive shared archive of documents, timeline breakdowns, and theories around Malik's disappearance, a forum thread that would eventually run to several thousand posts by the time the case broke open. Some of the amateur analysis was careless and occasionally cruel, wild speculation about Dana and Taewoo's divorce recycled as motive theory, with no basis. In fact, a burden Dana has said added its own quiet layer of pain to years already full of it. But it was, in the end, exactly this same community, sharing and resharing an updated age progression photograph across dozens of platforms over the years, that put the image in front of Malik's own classmate on that rainy Tuesday afternoon. A detail Detective Yang has cited more than once as proof that the same online space is capable of causing real harm to a grieving family can also, unpredictably, and without anyone intending it, become the exact mechanism that finally brings a missing child home. But that wasn't even the strangest part of what those years would eventually reveal. Roughly 18 months after Malik disappeared, a distant relative of the Young family, a cousin from Gangwon province whom Taewoo had met perhaps twice in his entire adult life, quietly took in what neighbors understood to be a nephew's child from a difficult family situation, a boy introduced to the small rural town as young Ho-jin, 7 years old, recently orphaned, in need of a stable home away from the complications of a broken family in Seoul. The cousin, a soft-spoken widow named Young Mira, who ran a small stationery shop and had no children of her own, raised the boy with what neighbors would later describe, almost universally, as genuine tenderness, enrolling him in the local elementary school under paperwork that identified her as his legal guardian, paperwork that, investigators would eventually discover, had been prepared not by any court, but by a family attorney named Song Kang-min, a longtime legal advisor to the Young Textile Group, whose signature appeared on documents that, on close inspection years later, contained inconsistencies no honest guardianship filing should ever have contained. The boy grew up believing, entirely and without suspicion, that his parents had died in an accident when he was very young, a story so consistently reinforced by the only adult in his life that questioning it never occurred to him, not through elementary school, not through the early years of middle school, not until a rainy Tuesday afternoon in his second year of high school when a classmate, Killing, time in the school's shared computer lab, pulled up a viral social media thread built around unsolved missing children cases and, laughing, asked whether anyone recognized the boy in an age-progressed photograph posted alongside a decade-old news article. Young Ho-jin, standing behind his classmate's shoulder, waiting his turn at the keyboard, felt something in his chest go very still. The photograph did not look exactly like him. Age progression software rarely produces anything more than an educated approximation, and the boy in the image had a slightly different jawline and slightly different eyes. But the boy's name beneath the photograph, Malik Reynolds Young, contained a surname he recognized instantly and had never once questioned, the same Young that sat quietly beside Ho-Jin on every one of his own school records. A shared family name he had always assumed was simply a coincidence common enough among distant relatives, never once considering, until that exact moment, that it might be the last fact left over from a life someone had carefully erased. He said nothing to his aunt that evening. He said nothing for nearly 3 weeks, sitting instead with a question so large he could not find a way to hold it without his hands shaking, researching quietly in the school library and, eventually, on a friend's phone rather than his aunt's home computer, piecing together a timeline that matched his own life with an accuracy that stopped feeling like coincidence somewhere around the third late night he spent doing it. He requested, through a biology teacher running an elective genetics unit that happened to offer optional at-home ancestry testing kits as a class project, one of the kits for himself, telling the teacher only that he was curious about his family history, a small, ordinary lie that would end up cracking open 8 years of silence. The teacher, a mild-mannered man named Mr. Yo, who had run the same optional unit for 6 years without incident, would later tell reporters that Ho-Jin had lingered after class the day he asked for the kit, hovering by the door in a way Mr. Yo now recognizes, in hindsight, as the posture of a student working up the courage to ask a much larger question than the one he actually voiced. He asked if the results were private, Mr. Yo recalled. I told him yes, of course, unless he wanted to share them. He just nodded and said, "Thank you," very quietly, and left. I didn't think about it again until the news broke months later, and then I couldn't stop thinking about it. The wrong suspect had been sitting in plain sight the entire time, and it was not a stranger at all. The DNA results took 6 weeks to process, routed first through the consumer testing company's standard database before a routine cross-check against a national missing persons registry, a feature the company had only recently added in partnership with law enforcement agencies working unsolved cases, flagged a partial match so strong that the company's own compliance team escalated it directly to detective Yang's old department rather than releasing it to the customer through the usual online portal. Detective Yang, though officially reassigned for over a year by then, was called back onto the case personally by a superior who remembered, correctly, that she had never fully let it go. What followed was not the joyful, uncomplicated reunion Dana had spent 8 years imagining in her most hopeful moments, though it was, undeniably, the miracle she had never stopped believing might eventually arrive. Detective Yang traveled personally to the small Gangwon province town, coordinating quietly with child welfare authorities to ensure the confirmation process protected a 15-year-old boy who had no idea, at the moment police first appeared at his school, that his entire understanding of his own life was about to be dismantled in a single conversation. She sat with him for nearly 2 hours before saying anything about his identity directly, letting him ask questions at his own pace, watching a boy who had spent 3 quiet weeks half suspecting the truth finally hear it said aloud by someone whose job was to be certain rather than someone still hoping to be wrong. Detective Yang traveled personally to the small Gangwon province town, coordinating quietly with child welfare authorities to ensure the confirmation process protected a 15-year-old boy who had no idea, at the moment police first appeared at his school, that his entire understanding of his own life was about to be dismantled in a single conversation. She sat with him for nearly 2 hours before saying anything about his identity directly, letting him ask questions at his own pace, watching a boy who had spent 3 quiet weeks half suspecting the truth finally hear it said aloud by someone whose job was to be certain rather than someone still hoping to be wrong. The reunion itself, arranged carefully over the following 2 weeks with a child psychologist present at every stage, took place first over a video call rather than in person, a decision made deliberately to give Malik, who by then thought of himself entirely as Ho-Jin, some measure of control over a process that had already taken so much control away from him. Dana has described that first call in halting, careful language, the strange experience of watching a teenager's face on a screen and searching it, helplessly, for the gap-toothed 7-year-old she had spent 8 years imagining, finding him there in small, unexpected flashes, a particular way of tilting his head, a laugh that arrived once, almost by accident, that sounded so exactly like the laugh. She remembered that she had to leave the room for a moment to compose herself. Malik, for his part, has said the call felt less like meeting a stranger and more like recognizing a song he hadn't heard in years, familiar in a way his conscious mind couldn't fully explain. Their first in-person meeting happened 3 weeks later in a quiet visitation room arranged by Child Welfare Services rather than anywhere either of them associated with the past, Dana bringing with her the second stuffed rabbit, Captain Carrots' twin, that she had kept on Malik's childhood bed for 8 years, uncertain whether a 15-year-old would want any part of it, and deciding, in the end, that the choice should be his to make rather than hers. Malik, according to the psychologist present, held the rabbit for a long moment without speaking, turning it over in his hands the way a person handles something they recognize without remembering exactly why, before setting it carefully on the table beside him and asking Dana, in a voice that cracked halfway through the question, to tell him about the day at the amusement park, every detail she could. Remember, because it was, he said, the one part of his own life that had never belonged to him. Dana spent nearly an hour that afternoon walking him through every detail she had. The teacup ride he rode twice, the churro, the 20 minutes at the photo booth with the grinning sun mascot, the exact bench where she had been sitting when she looked away, describing it all slowly and without flinching, understanding, she has said since, that giving her son back the missing pieces of his own history mattered more in that moment than protecting herself from having to relive the worst afternoon of her life out loud, one more time, for him. Young Mira, the aunt who had raised him, was questioned separately and broke down almost immediately, insisting through tears that she had genuinely believed the story she was told, that her cousin's family, meaning young Hai-suk, had presented her with a grieving orphaned boy in need of a home and had never once told her the truth of where he came from, a claim investigators found largely credible. Once her own background was fully examined, a woman with no financial motive, no history of deception, and a home that, whatever the horrifying circumstances of how the boy arrived there, had by every measurable account been safe, warm, and loving for 8 consecutive years. She has since told reporters that she loved the boy she raised without ever once suspecting she was participating, unknowingly, in someone else's crime, and that learning the truth felt like grieving a story she had believed was hers, while simultaneously being asked to celebrate a reunion that was, undeniably, someone else's rightful joy. Attorney Song Kang-min was a different matter entirely. Confronted with the guardianship documents bearing his own forged signatures and inconsistencies that a forensic document examiner identified within days, Song initially claimed the paperwork had been prepared under legitimate instruction from a grieving family attempting a difficult but lawful private arrangement. Digital forensics on his office computers, seized under warrant, told a different story, recovering deleted email threads between Song and young Hai-suk, stretching back to within days of Malik's disappearance. Threads that discussed, in language investigators described in court filings as chillingly practical, the logistics of establishing a new identity for a child, the paperwork required, and a rural relative willing to take him in without asking too many questions, along with, in one message that would later be read aloud in full during young Hai-suk's trial, an explicit instruction that the boy's surname be preserved in some altered form because, in Hai-suk's own words, a young should not lose his name simply because his mother could not be trusted to raise him properly. That single sentence, more than any piece of physical evidence recovered during the entire 8-year case, became the moment prosecutors would return to again and again during trial, the clearest proof that what had happened to Malik was never a stranger's crime of opportunity, but a calculated decision made, deliberately and over time, by someone who believed her family's name gave her the right to decide which mother deserved to keep her son. The recovered email threads also finally answered a question that had sat unresolved in Detective Yang's file for 8 years. The identity of the woman, the groundskeeper Han Kyung-ho, had described near the service gate on the day Malik disappeared, before recanting his account under pressure days later. Cell tower records subpoenaed for the former nanny, Yoo Ji-yoon, The same woman whose continued informal work for young Hae-suk had been noted and set aside during the original investigation, placed her phone within the immediate vicinity of Sky Garden's eastern loading dock during the exact window Malik went missing, a location she had never disclosed during her original, brief interview 8 years earlier, when investigators had asked only about her employment history and not, critically, about her whereabouts that specific afternoon. A gap in the original questioning that Detective Yang has since called the single hardest professional regret of her career. Yu, confronted with the cell records alongside Song Kang-min's emails, ultimately admitted, under a cooperation agreement that spared her the harshest possible sentence, that she had been the one to walk Malik away from the parade route, telling him, she confessed through tears, that his mother had asked her to bring him to a special surprise near the park's back gate, a claim of frightened, trusting. 7-year-old had no reason to doubt from a familiar face he had known since infancy. Yu Ji-yoon was charged as a co-conspirator in the kidnapping and sentenced to 5 years, a term reflecting both the direct, active role she played in physically removing Malik from his parents that day and the cooperation she ultimately provided that helped confirm the full scope of young Hae-suk's plan. Detective Yang has said that the single detail from Yu's confession she has never been able to fully set down is the plainness of it, that no elaborate scheme or physical struggle had ever been necessary at all. Only a familiar adult, a small child, had every reason to trust, walking him calmly away from his parents in the middle of a crowd too loud and too distracted to notice anything wrong. Yu's own account of that day, given during a lengthy proffer session with prosecutors, described a plan that young Hae-suk had presented to her weeks in advance, not as a kidnapping but as a rescue. Language investigators would come to recognize as a pattern throughout Hae-suk's own communications, a woman who had convinced not only herself but everyone she recruited into her plan that she was saving, a child rather than stealing one. Yu has said she was paid a modest sum for her role, though she insisted, through tears prosecutors found only partially credible, that money had mattered less to her than a genuine, if badly misplaced, loyalty to Hae-suk, who had employed and half-mentored her since she was in her early 20s, fresh out of a difficult family situation of her own and grateful, at the time, for the security the position offered. The confrontation between Dana and young Hae-suk, when it finally came during pretrial proceedings, was not the explosive scene reporters camped outside the courthouse had hoped to capture. Dana has since described it, in the one interview she gave discussing that moment directly, as almost unbearably quiet, Hae-suk seated across a courtroom in a wheelchair by then, her health failing, her composure, for the first time in the entire 8-year saga, visibly cracked, not from remorse, Dana believes, but from the simple, undignified experience of finally being caught after believing for so long that her wealth and position made her untouchable. "She looked at me," Dana said, "and I realized she still didn't think she had done anything unforgivable. She thought she had rescued him from me. That was the part I couldn't get past. Not the lie itself, but that she still believed it was love." The trial that followed drew significant national attention, and Dana sat through nearly every day of it, sometimes with Tae-woo present at a careful distance, sometimes with Simone-like support from her own visiting family members who flew in from Chicago for the proceedings' most difficult stretches, watching a courtroom slowly reconstruct, piece by piece, exactly how 8 years of her son's childhood had been quietly rewritten by people who had once sat at her own family's dinner table. Local news coverage of the trial ran nightly for weeks, and international outlets picked up the story within days of the first hearing, drawn by the same details that had made the case's earlier disappearance so widely followed. A missing child, a wealthy family, and a truth that turned out to be far stranger and far closer to home than anyone had initially imagined. Courtroom observers who sat through the trial's most difficult week described a single moment that seemed to silence the entire room, when a prosecutor asked young Hae-suk directly, on cross-examination, why she had never simply pursued custody through the courts if she genuinely believed Malik was unsafe with his mother, and Hae-suk, after a long pause, answered that she had not believed any Korean. Court would rule against a foreign mother's rights in the current political climate, a response that drew an audible reaction from the gallery, and that prosecutors would repeat in their closing argument as proof that Hae-suk's actions had never been born of desperation or genuine belief in danger, but of a calculated decision to bypass a legal system she assumed, wrongly and arrogantly, would not side with her. Dana, seated in the gallery beside her sister, has said that hearing that specific answer, more than any other moment in the trial, was when her lingering hope that Hae-suk might show some flicker of genuine remorse finally, fully died. Young Hae-suk was charged with kidnapping, custodial interference, and conspiracy to commit document fraud, charges that carried the possibility of a lengthy prison sentence, though her legal team, citing her advanced age and declining health, secured a plea arrangement that resulted in a significantly reduced sentence, 18 months served largely in a hospital-adjacent detention facility rather than a standard prison, an outcome that drew sharp public criticism across Korean media and that Dana herself has never fully accepted as justice, though she has said, with visible effort, that she has chosen not to let her anger over the sentence consume the years she still has left with her son. Attorney Song Kang-min was disbarred and sentenced to 6 years for his direct role in falsifying the guardianship documents that made the entire deception possible. A sentence prosecutors argued reflected his position as a trained legal professional who had knowingly weaponized the very system meant to protect children in order to help conceal one instead. The Jung Textile Group's board, distancing the company from a scandal that had by then dominated national headlines for months, forced young Hae-suk's early retirement from her formal role within weeks of her arrest, a corporate consequence that felt, to Dana and to much of the watching public, considerably smaller than the harm the woman had caused, though it remained, in the end, one of the few real costs Hae-suk's position and wealth could not entirely shield her from. The Jung Textile Group's board, distancing the company from a scandal that had by then dominated national headlines for months, forced young Hae-suk's early retirement from her formal role within weeks of her arrest, a corporate consequence that felt, to Dana and to much of the watching public, considerably smaller than the harm the woman had caused, though it remained, in the end, one of the few real costs Hae-suk's position and wealth could not entirely shield her from. News of the arrest spread across Seoul's business community within hours, and in the days that followed, several unrelated families who had once employed attorney Song Kang-min for private guardianship or estate matters came forward voluntarily, requesting independent review of documents he had prepared for them over the years, an unprecedented wave of scrutiny that ultimately uncovered no additional wrongdoing but that nonetheless left a visible dent in confidence across a small, insular legal community that had, for decades, quietly relied on men like Song to handle the private, complicated arrangements of Korea's wealthiest families without asking too many questions. Several commentators writing in the aftermath of the trial noted that the case had exposed something uncomfortable about how easily wealth and family reputation could bend a legal system meant to protect children. An observation Detective Yang herself has echoed in the training sessions she now regularly leads for younger officers across the province. Tae-woo's role in the years that followed proved, in the end, more complicated and more sympathetic than Dana had once feared during the coldest, most suspicious months of the original investigation. Digital forensics and testimony from household staff established that Tae-woo had not known, at the time of Malik's disappearance, what his mother had done, but had grown increasingly suspicious over the following 2 years as her behavior shifted, evasive answers, sudden trips to Gangwon province she refused to explain, a level of composed calm about their missing son that had never once matched the devastation he felt himself. When he finally confronted her directly, in the 3rd year, she had, according to Tae-woo's own later testimony, neither confirmed nor denied anything, instead warning him, in language he described to investigators as unmistakably threatening despite its softness, that pursuing the matter further would cost him everything: his standing in the family, his position at the company, and access to resources. He still, shamefully, admitted he had been unwilling to lose. Tae-woo recalled, in a deposition later entered into the trial record, the exact words his mother had used that evening, sitting across from him in the same estate sitting room where he had once brought Dana to meet her for the first time. "You will lose him either way, Tae-woo. The only question is whether you also lose everything else." He did not go to the police that night, or the following week, or for the 4 years after that. He has said, in the only public statement he has given since the truth came out, that this failure will follow him for the rest of his life regardless of any legal consequence, and that no explanation he can offer, fear, cowardice, misplaced loyalty to a mother he still did not fully understand, will ever feel sufficient to the son he failed to look for hard enough. Young Soo-yeon, Tae-woo's younger sister, whose early interview had hinted at family tension without ever imagining the truth behind it, has since become one of Malik's steadiest connections to his father's side of the family, driving out to Gangwon province regularly in the months before Malik's formal transition back to Seoul, and later, once he and Dana settled back into an apartment near his old childhood neighborhood, showing up most weekends with a specific, almost stubborn consistency that Malik has said reminded him, without knowing why at first, of an aunt he somehow already trusted. Soo-yeon has spoken publicly, with visible pain, about the guilt of not pushing harder on her own early suspicions all those years ago. Though Dana has been quick, in every interview where the subject comes up, to note that Soo-yeon's guilt was never remotely comparable to her mother's guilt, and that the family needed people like Soo-yeon willing to keep showing up once the truth came out, rather than disappearing into the same shame that kept Tae-woo silent for years. Malik, who now goes by both names depending on the day and the person he is speaking to, has said in the careful, guarded way of a teenager still working through something too large for easy language, that reuniting with Dana felt less like remembering a lost life and more like meeting someone he had somehow always known without knowing why. He has continued a relationship with young Mira, the aunt who raised him without ever knowing the full truth herself, a relationship both Dana and Malik have insisted on protecting, understanding that the woman's love, however built on a foundation of lies she did not construct herself, was never anything but real. His relationship with Tae-woo remains slower, more guarded, rebuilt in small increments across supervised visits that have gradually, in the 2 years since the reunion, become something closer to an ordinary, if still careful, father and son relationship, the two of them relearning each other across a gap neither can fully name. Detective Yang Soo-min, who never let the file leave her desk even during the years she had no authority to actively work it, has said that Malik's case taught her something she now tells every young officer she trains, that the most dangerous assumption in a missing child investigation is believing the threat must come from a stranger, when the truth, more often than anyone wants to admit, is already sitting somewhere inside the family photographs no one thought to look at twice. She keeps pinned to a corkboard in her current office, a single printed copy of the age progression photograph that eventually broke the case. A reminder, she has said, that the tools built to imagine a missing child's future sometimes end up doing exactly what they were designed for, in ways no one on the day they were created could have fully predicted. She has since built a training module around the case for new detectives joining the province's missing persons unit, walking trainees through the full 8-year timeline, the dead ends, the retracted statement no one pushed hard enough on the first time, the alibi that checked out on paper but was never asked the right question in the first place. She tells every new class the same thing at the end of the session, that she does not teach the case because the department got it right, but precisely because it got so much of it wrong for so long, and that the only real lesson worth carrying forward is the discomfort of sitting with a case that refuses to close, rather than the relief of pretending it already has. Dana's foundation, which began as a small, grief-driven effort to fund age progression technology for other families, has since grown into a modestly sized nonprofit working directly with Korean and international law enforcement agencies on unsolved missing children cases, an organization Dana has said she never wanted to need but is deeply grateful now exists, both for other families still waiting, and for the particular, hard-won understanding she carries about exactly how long waiting can last before it finally, impossibly, ends. The foundation has since helped fund updated age progression imaging in at least 11 other unresolved cases across the country, 3 of which have since led to confirmed identifications, outcomes Dana has said she can never fully celebrate without also feeling the specific, complicated grief of knowing exactly what those other families are still living through, minute by minute, the way she once did. Malik himself has, in the 2 years since the reunion, begun speaking occasionally at the Foundation's events, standing beside his mother in front of small audiences of donors and volunteers, describing, in the careful, still-forming language of a teenager working through something enormous, what it felt like to grow up as someone else's stolen chance at love, and what it has felt like since to slowly, unevenly, become himself again. He has said, more than once, that he does not think of his years as young Ho-jin as false or wasted. understanding now that the aunt who raised him loved him completely, even inside a lie neither of them had chosen, but that he has also had to learn, slowly and without any clear map for how to do it, what it means to carry two entire childhoods inside one single, ongoing life. He has said, in the same careful voice, that the hardest part was never learning who took him, or even why, but learning how to be angry at a grandmother who had also, undeniably, shaped so much of who he already was by the time the truth reached him, a contradiction he has not resolved and has stopped expecting to, understanding, in the plain, hard-won way, only someone his age who has lived through. Something like this can understand that some truths simply have to be carried rather than solved. The groundskeeper, Han Kyung-ho, whose retracted statement had puzzled Detective Yang for years, was eventually re-interviewed after the case broke open and admitted, quietly and with visible shame, that a household staff member connected to the Young estate had approached him within days of his original statement, offering a modest sum of money to simply say he had been mistaken, an offer he had accepted, out of fear rather than greed, afraid, he said, of what a powerful family might do to a groundskeeper who insisted too loudly on what he had actually seen. His retracted memory, once restored under oath years later, matched almost exactly what investigators had by then already pieced together from Song Kang-min's own documents. One more small, ordinary person caught, like so many others in this story, between telling the truth and protecting himself from people who had made very clear what telling the truth might cost him. Sky Garden, the amusement park itself, quietly repaired its long-broken camera within a month of the story breaking nationally, a small, almost embarrassed corporate response to a scandal that had, however unfairly, made its grinning sun mascot and its cheerful summer parade into symbols, for a while, of something considerably darker than the park had ever intended to represent. Park management issued a public statement expressing sympathy for the Reynolds-Young family and outlining new security protocols for its busiest crowd events, a response Dana has said she appreciated without ever quite being able to walk past that particular promenade again during the one visit she has made back to the park since 3 years after Malik's return, standing near the same bench where she had once looked away for less than 2 minutes and lost 8 years of her son's childhood in the space between one glance and the next. Ethan Park, Malik's childhood best friend, learned of the reunion through the same viral news coverage as most of the country and reached out through the Foundation's contact page within days, asking, almost shyly, whether Malik still liked dinosaurs, a question that made its way to Malik through Dana and that he answered, months later, with a message of his own, the beginning of a friendship. The two of them have since said feels less like starting over and more like picking a conversation back up after an unusually long pause. Miss Choi, Malik's first-grade teacher, learned of his discovery from a local news broadcast while grading papers in her own classroom, and has said she sat completely still for several minutes afterward, unable to process the news until she pulled the folder of hand-drawn detective diagrams she had kept in her desk drawer for 8 years and looked through them one final time before finally, for the first time since he disappeared, allowing herself to believe the story might actually end with him coming home. She wrote Malik a letter that year, mailed through the Foundation, which he has said he keeps folded inside the drawer of his nightstand, unwilling to throw it away and unsure, even now, exactly why it means as much to him as it does. The two boys finally met again in person at the Foundation's 7th annual walk, held that June for the first time not as a vigil, but as something closer to a celebration, Malik walking the same route his mother and his old classmates had walked without him for 6 consecutive years, past the school he barely remembered, past an apartment building he did not recognize until he stood in front of it, and felt, he has said, something wordless and immediate settle in his chest. Captain Carrots, the original stuffed rabbit recovered untouched from the back seat of Dana's car on the day Malik disappeared, sat in an evidence storage locker for the better part of 8 years, cataloged and preserved as part of the case file long after anyone actively expected it to matter again. Detective Yang personally retrieved it the week the DNA match was confirmed, driving it herself to the visitation room rather than routing it through the ordinary evidence release process, Unwilling, she has said, to let something that small and that important travel back to a child through anyone other than the person who had spent 8 years refusing to let his file close. Malik has kept both rabbits since, the original and its worn, well-loved twin, side by side on a shelf in his room, a small, deliberate act of holding both halves of his life in the same space rather than choosing one over the other. Sometimes the truth doesn't disappear. It simply waits, hidden inside a family name no one questioned, an old photograph on a stranger's forum post, a DNA kit ordered for a school project for someone brave enough, even at 15 years old, to keep looking until an entire stolen childhood finally made sense. Thank you for watching. If this case fascinated you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more incredible crime and mystery stories. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and never stop asking questions.